The boy sat too small for the leather chair, his shoulders pulled tight, his jaw locked in the kind of stillness children learn only when the world keeps reminding them to stay quiet. His face held no expression at first glance, but a closer look showed a flicker of something deeper, a practiced stillness, the kind that grows from years of being treated like background noise. His hands rested in his lap, fingers curled inward, not from fear of the room, but from fear of what would happen to his mother if he reacted wrong. Across the table, the wealthy men and women lounged in effortless power, their bodies loose and relaxed, glasses raised, laughter spilling too easily between them. Their posture told the entire story. They belonged, and he did not. The rich man leading the table leaned forward, shoulders wide, confidence leaking from every movement. His grin stretched too far, eyes narrowing in amusement as he gestured toward the boy like a prop they had brought in for entertainment. His finger hovered in the air, not just pointing, claiming. Behind him, the room glowed with warm gold light bouncing off crystal bottles, polished wood, and velvet chairs. The atmosphere felt thick, almost staged, as if the entire environment was built to magnify the imbalance between them. Beneath all of that shimmer, a heavy social weight pressed into the boy's chest. The unspoken rule pulsed in the air. People like them get to play. People like him get tested. He didn't move, he didn't blink. He just absorbed every sneer, every laugh, every gaze that treated him like an amusing inconvenience. Inside, something tightened, not anger, not yet, but a quiet endurance shaped by years of watching his mother scrub these same floors while pretending not to hear the comments tossed carelessly around her. His heartbeat slowed, steadying itself. A moment of control the rich man didn't notice, but he would. The boy didn't know it yet, but this would be the night the room learned exactly who they were laughing at. Hours earlier, the boy's morning had looked nothing like this room of polished wood and crystal light. He had woken to the soft scrape of his mother tying her apron, her face tired but determined. Her expression had held that familiar blend of quiet pride and constant worry, the look of someone who works twice as hard for half the respect. He remembered how she stood in their small kitchen, her shoulders slightly bent, rubbing warmth into her hands before another long shift. She never complained. She simply kept moving, kept serving, kept smiling at people who never saw her. The boy watched her then, noticing things children were never supposed to understand. How she hid the bruise on her forearm from bumping into a storage cart after being rushed by a manager. How she pretended she wasn't sore when she lifted trays heavier than she was paid to carry. How she swallowed her exhaustion the same way she swallowed disrespect. He admired her, he worried for her, and he wanted more for her. But today, everything shifted when one of the wealthy guests demanded something she couldn't ignore. A last-minute cleanup, a private game room reset, a rush order delivered with a tone sharper than necessary. She had brought him along only because she had no choice. The babysitter canceled. The shift was mandatory, and the manager's glare made the decision for her. He remembered standing beside her as they walked through the hallway lined with expensive paintings, her back straighter than usual. She kept whispering soft reminders to him, stay close, stay quiet, don't look anyone in the eye too long. Not because he was trouble, but because in places like this, trouble found kids like him first. When the rich man spotted them, his smirk had grown instantly. That single glance created the shift, the turn of the atmosphere from routine to dangerous. The boy felt something cold in his stomach as the man motioned him forward, as if selecting a piece of entertainment for the evening. His mother froze, her breath catching. She looked between her son and the man, silently pleading for the moment to pass. It didn't, and with every step the boy took toward that table, he understood something painfully clear. This wasn't about poker. It was about power. And power tonight was about to pick the wrong kid. When the boy reached the poker table, the air around him shifted again, tighter, colder, heavier. The adults didn't need words to make their intentions clear. Their faces said enough. One woman hid her smirk behind a glass of whiskey, her eyes glinting with the thrill of watching something she assumed would be embarrassing. Another man leaned back in his chair, arms folded, wearing the expression of someone settling in for a performance he already believed he'd enjoy. Their posture told him exactly where he stood in their world, beneath them. The wealthy host lifted a single poker chip and rolled it between his fingers with casual arrogance. His smile stretched wide, but it wasn't friendly. It was performative, designed to draw attention, to make the boy small in the eyes of everyone watching. He tapped the chip on the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. A sound meant to call a dog, not a child. The room responded the way he wanted. Light laughter, soft murmurs, shoulders leaning closer to one another, anticipating a scene. The boy felt heat rising in his face, though he kept his expression still. His shoulders tightened, his chin dipped slightly toward his chest, a protective gesture he'd learned in places where dignity wasn't given freely. He didn't look at his mother, though he felt her fear standing behind him like a silent storm. He knew if he met her eyes, she would crumble, and he would too. Instead, he stared at the table, breathing slowly. One breath, two, just enough to keep the sting from reaching his eyes. He could hear the host's amusement deepening as the boy stayed quiet. The man's body leaned forward, elbows planted, chest puffed with the false bravery of someone who knew everyone else in the room would support whatever he did. This wasn't just a test. This was a demonstration, a reminder to the staff about who controlled their livelihoods. The boy didn't move. He didn't react. He simply held the line of his own stillness, even as the rich man tried to melt it away. But the moment the boy lifted his eyes, just slightly, the room missed the tiny spark that had begun to wake inside him. The boy's eyes lifted only a fraction, but it was enough to expose the tension pulsing behind them. A quiet storm trapped beneath the surface. It was faint, almost invisible, the kind of strength people miss when they're too busy laughing at someone they think is powerless. Across the table, the wealthy guests noticed only what they wanted to see. A poor kid, out of place, outnumbered, outranked. Their reactions fell into predictable patterns. One man smirked, raising his glass higher, his body language loose and self-assured, the pose of someone who believed the world existed for his amusement. Another woman leaned forward, elbows resting on the green felt, eyes bright with cruel anticipation. Her expression said she wasn't watching a child. She was watching an opportunity for entertainment. A soft ripple of laughter moved through the table, not loud enough to be called mean, but sharp enough to cut. The boy felt every bit of it. Behind him, his mother stood rigid, her hands pressed together tightly, her shoulders pulled toward her ears, her breath shallow and uneven. She knew these people. She knew how quickly a careless moment could turn into a lost job, a complaint, a punishment. And she knew the risk of being seen as anything other than obedient. She didn't dare step forward. She didn't dare speak. She didn't dare break the invisible barrier that separated the staff from the wealthy guests. But her eyes stayed locked on her son, silently begging him to hold on, to survive this without making a mistake neither of them could afford. The host, sensing full control of the room, leaned back in exaggerated satisfaction. His expression shifted into something smug, a performer sensing his audience was fully on his side. He gestured broadly toward the boy, inviting more laughter from the guests around him. Not because the boy had done anything funny, but because humiliating someone smaller made him feel bigger. Through it all, the boy sat still. His shoulders remained tight. His hands stayed in his lap. His breathing shallow, controlled. He looked like he was shrinking. But inside, something else was happening, a slow tightening, a gathering of focus, a depth the room still hadn't recognized. And while the guests saw only a scared child, none of them realized they were underestimating someone who had been studying far more than they could imagine. The host finally pushed a deck of cards across the table, the sound of sliding cardboard strangely loud in the spacious room. His movements were theatrical, deliberate, meant to draw everyone's attention back to him. He tapped the cards once on the table as if sealing the moment. He wasn't offering a game. He was offering a spectacle. The boy's eyelids lowered slightly, a micro-flinch he couldn't hide. He knew this wasn't a simple test or a harmless distraction. The host's smug expression made it clear something else was at stake. Something bigger, something terrifying. The man leaned forward, folding his hands together. His smile thinned. His posture sharpened. His eyes gleamed with a challenge he expected the boy to fail. The guests sensed the shift. Their conversations faded. Their amusement tightened into sharper curiosity. The atmosphere thickened. Even the dim chandelier light seemed to pause. Behind the boy, his mother had gone completely still. Her hands had moved to her apron, twisting the fabric between her fingers. A silent prayer formed in her thoughts, one shaped not by hope, but fear. She recognized that look in the host's eyes. It was the same look she'd seen when supervisors cornered employees with impossible demands, when wealthy clients used their money as a weapon, when mistakes were punished with pay cuts or threats disguised as professional warnings. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was leverage. And then the host finally revealed what the boy already sensed. The stakes involved his mother's job. The words, spoken casually and without concern, sank into the room like a stone hitting deep water. The kid didn't need details. He understood instantly. If he refused, his mother might lose the work she depended on. If he failed, she might face consequences far worse than embarrassment. A quiet tremor moved through his chest. Not panic, not yet, but something dangerously close. He didn't look at his mother. He couldn't. Her fear was already heavy enough. Instead, he took a small breath and placed one hand on the edge of the table. His fingers curled slightly around the wood, grounding himself. The host grinned wider at that tiny gesture, convinced the boy was cracking under pressure. But the boy wasn't cracking. He was steadying, preparing. Because he had spent years watching people play games they thought he was too young to understand. And tonight, someone had finally pushed him too far. The man thought the boy was cornered, never realizing pressure was the very thing that awakened his talent. The deck sat between them untouched, yet the room already felt like it was tilting. The boy's fingers tightened slightly around the table's edge, his breathing shallow but steady. His face stayed blank, but there was a subtle change in the lines around his eyes, a quiet sharpening, as if something inside him had begun to assemble itself piece by piece. Across from him, the host mistook that stillness for fear. His shoulders relaxed, settling into the comfortable arrogance of someone who believed the outcome was already written. He tapped the deck again, softer this time, savoring the tension he thought he had complete control over. The guests leaned closer. Chairs creaked, breaths synced to the rhythm of anticipation. No one spoke, but their expressions spoke loudly, some curious, some amused. A few openly entertained by the idea of watching a child fail publicly. The boy didn't look at any of them. His eyes flicked to the cards only once, and in that brief glance his posture shifted, not dramatically, but enough. His spine straightened a little, his shoulders rolled back a fraction. One foot anchored itself more firmly beneath the chair. It was a stance not of surrender, but of readiness. His mother noticed first. Her breath caught. Her hands froze mid-motion against her apron. She recognized that shift, the one her son made whenever he was about to solve something, the one he made when faced with school puzzles far beyond his grade, the one she saw when he studied patterns like other kids studied cartoons. But she also recognized the danger of that readiness. Hope was a luxury their life rarely allowed, and hope in this room could cost too much. The host, oblivious to nuance, finally picked up the deck and began shuffling. His movements were flashy, loud, meant to impress, meant to intimidate. He didn't notice the boy watching his hands, not nervously, but analytically. The lights above flickered faintly against the polished table surface, throwing reflections that shimmered like shifting signals. The boy's eyes followed them, absorbing every detail, every rhythm. The atmosphere tightened around them, as if the room itself sensed a change but couldn't name it yet. The balance of power was still uneven, but the first hairline crack had appeared. And as the cards fell into place, no one realized the boy wasn't intimidated. He was calculating. The host finished shuffling with a flourish, snapping the deck flat against the table as if sealing a deal he believed he had already won. His expression shifted subtly, no longer playful, no longer amused. Something colder surfaced beneath the smile, the kind of demeanor powerful men used when they were about to make a point at someone else's expense. He leaned forward, elbows pressing into the green felt, shoulders squared in dominance. His eyes locked on the boy, not with curiosity, but with expectation. Expectation of failure, expectation of humiliation, expectation of control. He wanted witnesses. He wanted the room to see it. Around him, the guests sensed the shift in his posture and adjusted their own. Their faces stiffened into attentive smirks, their bodies angled toward the table. Their energy sharpened, like an audience settling in for the climax of a show. One woman rested her chin on her hand, eyes narrowing with predatory focus. A man loosened his tie slightly, leaning back with the smug comfort of someone watching an outcome he believed he already understood. A soft chuckle rose from someone near the corner of the table, the kind people let slip when they expect cruelty to be entertaining. The host finally spoke again, but only indirectly, letting his body language carry the message. This game isn't just a game. Your mother's job is the price of your mistakes. The boy absorbed every detail, the angle of the host's eyebrows, the tightening of his jaw, the calculated way he positioned his hands over the deck like a gatekeeper guarding a door he never meant to let the boy enter. A faint tremor moved through the boy's chest, but he kept his face still. He knew men like this. Men who felt taller only when someone else was forced to stand lower. Men who used silence as a trap and expectations as a cage. Behind him, his mother stood frozen, shoulders drawn so tight they nearly touched her ears. She wasn't breathing evenly anymore. Her hands twisted into the fabric of her apron with such force the seams strained. She knew the host wasn't testing skill. He was testing obedience. The boy could feel her fear like a second heartbeat in the room, fast, frantic, pleading. But beneath that fear, he sensed something else inside himself rising slowly, quietly. A calm focus shaped by years of watching from the shadows. A discipline no one in this room had ever imagined he possessed. The host's smile widened. He believed he had the advantage. He believed he had already won. But the moment he dealt the first card, he unknowingly set the stage for his own downfall. The first card slid across the table with a soft whisper, the sound barely audible yet sharp enough to slice through the quiet. The boy watched it travel toward him, his face still, his body held in that careful, practiced tension he'd learned from living in spaces where one wrong move could shift everything. He didn't reach for the card right away. He let it rest. He let the room watch him hesitate. The guests misread the pause instantly. One man leaned back, mumbling something smug under his breath as if he were narrating the boy's supposed fear. Another guest exchanged a knowing glance with a companion, their eyes filled with condescending amusement. Their collective assumption wrapped around the table like a fog, a belief that they were witnessing predictable weakness. The host smirked, lifting his chin slightly, his confidence settling deeper into his posture. He mistook the boy's stillness for intimidation. He mistook the silence for surrender. But the boy wasn't frozen. He was studying. His gaze drifted first to the card's angle, then to the host's hand movements, then to the subtle reflections on the polished table surface. Every detail was information. Every movement was a clue. He had spent years watching card games from the far corner of rooms while his mother cleaned up after the rich. He had absorbed rhythm. He had memorized patterns. He had learned to predict reactions without even realizing he was learning. And tonight, all of that quiet observation began to flicker alive inside him. The host dealt again, faster this time, settling deeper into his performance. His gestures grew larger. His smile stretched wider. He reveled in the power he believed he held, each card becoming another step in his show of dominance. The boy watched his every motion with unnerving calm. His breathing steadied. His shoulders lowered a fraction. His hands, once curled inward, rested more naturally on the table. One guest noticed the shift but didn't understand it. Her head tilted slightly, concern or curiosity flickering in her eyes. But she said nothing. The social hierarchy in the room was too rigid for doubts. Behind the boy, his mother clenched her hands together, her nails digging into her palms. Her fear hadn't lessened. But she sensed something changing, a focus in her son she had seen only in rare moments, usually when he solved puzzles far beyond his age. The boy finally touched his first card, not with shaking hands, but with slow, deliberate control. The room saw hesitation. The host saw vulnerability. But beneath the surface, something else had begun, a quiet awakening that no one recognized. Not yet, and as the second card touched the boy's fingertips, the host still didn't realize the game had already slipped out of his hands. The boy lifted his first card just enough to see the corner, a tiny movement, almost invisible, yet it shifted the atmosphere around him. His eyes didn't widen, his expression didn't flicker. His face remained quiet, unreadable, as if he were absorbing not just the card but the entire room. Across the table, the host mistook the silence for fear. His shoulders loosened. His smirk deepened. He leaned back with the ease of a man who believed he had engineered the perfect situation. He tapped his own cards twice loudly, as though reminding everyone that he controlled the rhythm of the game. Someone laughed softly in response, their amusement pressed with a thin layer of cruelty. Another guest leaned forward, elbows touching the felt, watching the boy with the eagerness of someone waiting for a predictable collapse. Their eyes held expectation, not of skill, but of failure. But the boy's eyes saw everything they didn't. The way the host's left finger twitched before dealing, the slight gap in one of the card edges, the reflection of the room's chandelier shimmering across the polished wood like a series of signals. Patterns, timing, sequences, information no one in the room realized they were giving him. His breathing found a rhythm, slow in, quiet out. His shoulders settled. A controlled stillness wrapped around him, not of fear, but of focus sharpening into something precise. The host finally revealed the first community card with a dramatic flair, dragging it across the table as if announcing the beginning of the boy's downfall. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the wealthy spectators. But the boy didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He only traced the card with his eyes, connecting it to the memory of his own hand. His mother's hands flew to her mouth. She didn't know how to read the cards, but she knew how to read her son, and something about his posture frightened her. Not because he looked scared, but because he didn't. The host leaned in, resting his weight on his elbows, letting the boy feel the full force of his arrogance. His body language was loud, break, stumble, submit, but the boy stayed still, too still. Some of the guests noticed it then, the eerie calm. A few exchanged glances, unsure. Doubt flickered for the first time, not in the boy, in them, because nothing about his expression matched the humiliation they expected to enjoy. And as the next card hovered above the table, something in the host's confidence trembled. Just slightly, just enough to mark the beginning of his unraveling. The next card slid onto the felt with a crisp sound, sharp enough to draw every gaze toward the center of the table. The boy watched it land, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in confusion, not in fear, but in calculation. The faintest shift in his breathing hinted that something inside him had clicked into place. Across from him, the host noticed the movement too, though he misunderstood it instantly. He mistook analysis for anxiety. He mistook focus for intimidation. He mistook quiet strength for quiet panic. He let out a low chuckle, leaning forward as if closing in on his prey. His posture radiated victory long before any cards were revealed. He wanted the boy to see his confidence. He wanted the room to celebrate it. He wanted control to feel absolute. The guests followed his lead. One man smirked and nudged the person beside him, as if signaling they were about to witness the boy fold under pressure. A woman sipped her drink slowly, eyes half-lidded with satisfaction. Another tapped her bracelet against the table absent-mindedly, the metallic rhythm echoing like a countdown to a failure she expected to enjoy. But their assumptions created blind spots, and the boy filled those blind spots with quiet observation. His eyes took in everything, the rhythm of the host's taps, the spacing of the cards, the sequencing of the shuffle, the subtle tension in the host's jaw whenever he pretended not to care. These were patterns. Patterns the boy had seen in different forms his entire life. In grocery lines where people judged him before he spoke. In schoolrooms where teachers underestimated him. In the quiet corners of the casino lounge where he had watched countless games while waiting for his mother to finish late shifts. He knew when someone was bluffing. He knew when someone was overconfident. He knew when someone believed the room belonged to them. And he knew how often those people were wrong. Behind him, his mother's fear tightened with every second. Her fingers pressed to her lips. Her shoulders trembled. She didn't understand the game, but she understood humiliation. She felt its shadow stretching toward her child. The host revealed another card with theatrical bravado, expecting a reaction. The boy gave him none. Instead, a strange silence fell between them, thick, heavy, unspoken. For the first time, the host hesitated, barely a pause. Barely a breath, but enough. Enough for the room to sense that something had shifted, even if they didn't grasp why. The boy's gaze met the host's, calm, unshaken, deeply aware, and the host blinked. Because in that single blink, the first real crack appeared, and the boy quietly stepped through it. The room held its breath as the next card touched the table. A soft flick, a gentle slide. A sound swallowed instantly by the sudden tension thickening in the air. The boy's eyes tracked the card with precise focus. his face calm in a way that made the moment unnervingly quiet. His expression didn't match the humiliation the room hoped to witness. There was no panic, no confusion, no fear spiraling through him. Instead, there was clarity, complete, unsettling clarity. The host noticed the stillness, but again he misread it. He leaned back confidently, shoulders loose, chin lifted as if the room existed only to reflect his superiority. He tapped his cards twice, his old rhythm returning like a practiced performance. But underneath the gesture, a microscopic shift cracked through his confidence. His finger hesitated for half a second before the tap. His jaw tightened with a tension too slight for most to notice. His eyes flicked toward the spectators, checking for their approval instead of commanding it. He needed their reassurance, a sign the evening was still unfolding the way he intended. It wasn't. Several guests leaned in, something uncertain flickering behind their amusement. One man squinted at the boy, sensing something he couldn't articulate. A woman lowered her drink slowly, her bracelet clinking against the glass as her smile faded. Another guest whispered under his breath, unsure whether the boy's unreadable calm was innocence or something far more dangerous. The boy didn't notice them, or maybe he did, but he didn't care. His breathing steadied into a rhythm so controlled it felt deliberate. His spine aligned, his shoulders relaxed. His fingers rested lightly against the table, no longer gripping the edge for support. He wasn't reacting anymore. He was positioning. Because with each card revealed, the patterns grew clearer in his mind, the sequencing from the shuffle, the host's unconscious tells, the probability mapping he had learned not from books, but from years of watching quietly while cleaning staff wiped down tables after long nights. He understood the host's strategy. He understood the table's energy. He understood exactly where the game was headed. And the host sensed something too, not fully, not consciously, but enough to make his smile tighten unnaturally at the corners. He tapped the deck again, this time too quickly, a crackle of nerves slipping beneath the surface. Behind the boy, his mother felt the shift like a drop in atmospheric pressure. Her heart pounded, her hands trembled. But through the fear, something unexpected flickered, the faintest spark of recognition. She had seen this expression on her son before, not during games, not during tests, but during moments when numbers, patterns, and logic unfolded effortlessly in his mind, as if the world were quietly revealing its code only to him. The host finally pushed forward a high-stakes bet, expecting dominance to crush the boy into submission. But the boy didn't shrink. He didn't stall. He didn't look at his mother for reassurance. He simply inhaled once and matched the bet with a calmness that froze the room. Every guest stilled. Every whisper died. Every expression shifted. Because for the first time, they questioned whether the boy truly understood what he was doing. And if he did, what did that mean for the host? And as the chips settled on the table, a silent truth echoed through the room. The boy wasn't playing the host's game anymore. He was dismantling it. The chips made a soft clatter as they landed, a sound far too small to justify the shockwave it sent through the room. The boy's calm, deliberate movement didn't match anything the guests expected from him. The host's smirk faltered for the first time, barely, subtly, but enough to shift the atmosphere into something colder, tighter, more uncertain. He hadn't anticipated resistance. He certainly hadn't anticipated confidence. His fingers paused over his own stack of chips, the motion suddenly stiff where it had been fluid before. His shoulders rolled back, but not naturally, more like he was forcing himself into the posture of someone still in control. His breath hitched with a barely audible strain. He looked around for validation. The room didn't offer it. Guests exchanged hesitant glances. The earlier smirk softened into confusion. Someone exhaled slowly, the sound sharp against the thickening quiet. Because they all saw the same thing now, the boy wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't being pulled into the host's rhythm. He was creating his own. The host picked up the next card to reveal, but his hand betrayed him. His thumb slipped slightly on the edge, his confidence wobbling for a fraction of a second. He recovered quickly, but the damage was done. The boy noticed the slip instantly. His eyes flicked to the host's wrist, tracing the tremor. His breath smoothed, slow, and controlled. He recognized tells the host didn't realize he had. Behind him, his mother pressed a hand to her chest. Not out of hope, but out of disbelief. She saw the host's composure thinning. She saw the room's uncertainty growing. and she saw her son sitting with a focus she had only glimpsed in quiet moments at home, when numbers, puzzles, and patterns unfurled in his mind as naturally as breathing. The next card turned over. A shift of probability, a shift of power. Guests leaned in, their eyes jumping between the card, the host, and the boy. Something unspoken passed between them, an understanding that the boy had not been swallowed by the pressure, but had learned to stand inside it. The host forced a laugh, too loud, too sharp, too defensive. He tried to reassert dominance with bravado in his voice, with exaggerated gestures, with the performance of a man still in control. But his body told a different story. His knee bounced once under the table. His fingers tapped an uneven rhythm. His jaw tightened every time he looked at the cards. The boy watched these cracks form in real time, his mind assembling them like pieces of a puzzle he had solved many times before. He didn't need the cards to read the host. He only needed the man's unraveling. And for the first time since the game started, the host realized something he wasn't able to articulate. This child wasn't playing up to his level. The host was sinking down to the child's. And as the host reached for the next card with unsteady hands, one truth pressed harder than ever. He was no longer leading the game, he was chasing it. The next card landed, and something shifted so sharply that even those who barely understood poker felt it in their bones. The boy's eyes tracked the reveal with controlled precision, his face as calm as still water. But the host's reaction, barely a flicker, a tightening at the corner of his mouth, exposed more than any card could. His confidence didn't just weaken, it wavered, and the room felt the tremor. Several guests leaned back, suddenly unsure. A woman who had been laughing earlier now lowered her glass slowly, her brows drawing together. A man stopped mid-whisper, his expression turning stiff as he replayed the last few moments in his head. They were starting to see it. The small details, the patterns emerging, the widening crack in the host's performance, because the boy wasn't reacting like a clueless child. He was reacting like someone who saw more than the surface. Someone who recognized bluffs not from experience on casino floors, but from reading people who treated him like background noise his whole life. And slowly, the room began to realize they had misread him entirely. The host felt their shift before he fully understood it. His shoulders pulled tighter. He cleared his throat more forcefully than necessary. He adjusted his watch, a nervous tick disguised as casual movement. He could sense his audience drifting, not toward the boy, but away from him. Behind the boy, his mother watched with wide, trembling eyes. Her breath caught every few seconds as emotions crashed through her: fear, hope, disbelief, dread. She didn't know the rules of poker, but she recognized what it looked like when a powerful man lost control of a room. She had seen it in managers exposed for their mistakes, in supervisors who pushed too hard and watched their authority slip. The host made another bet, larger this time, a desperate attempt to reassert dominance. His hand hesitated midair, as if his confidence had to claw its way to the surface, and the boy, without flinching, matched it again. No theatrics, no uncertainty, just a smooth movement that sliced through the silence. A murmur rippled across the table, not laughter, not mockery, something closer to unease. A few guests exchanged looks, silently questioning how a child from the staff wing had just stared down a man who built an identity on intimidation. The host felt their doubt like a bruise forming beneath the surface. He didn't know what the boy saw. He didn't understand how the boy was staying calm. But he felt something he had never anticipated feeling tonight, threatened. He forced a smile anyway, stretching it too wide, too sharp. He tried to reassert his authority with a loud shuffle, his movements exaggerated. But even that failed him. His hands shook, and a card slipped, hitting the table at an awkward angle. A tiny gasp left someone's lips. That slip was not normal. That crack was not small anymore. And the boy leaned back slightly, a posture so subtle yet so confident that it made several guests inhale in disbelief. He wasn't intimidated. He wasn't overwhelmed. He wasn't breaking. He was waiting, and the host felt it, deeply, dangerously. Because in that tightening moment, everyone sensed a shift. The boy wasn't fighting to survive the game anymore. The host was fighting not to lose to him. The host exhaled slowly, a forced release meant to mimic control, but his shoulders betrayed him with a subtle shake. He adjusted his chair, then his cufflinks, then the chips in front of him. Restless movements meant to look casual, yet revealing a growing desperation beneath the surface. He watched the boy too closely now, not as a child, not as entertainment, but as a threat he didn't understand. The boy, meanwhile, stayed unnervingly still, his face calm, his breathing steady, his fingers resting lightly on the edge of the table, no longer gripping it for support. His expression wasn't empty anymore. It held a quiet certainty, a depth the host had failed to recognize until it was far too late. Around them, the room shifted in energy. People who once smirked now leaned forward in uneasy silence. Those who expected humiliation now sensed something entirely different unfolding. A woman clasped her hands together tightly, eyes darting between the boy and the host. A man who had been laughing earlier now sat frozen, his confidence drained. The social hierarchy that once seemed immovable suddenly felt fragile. The host cleared his throat and revealed the next card with exaggerated flair, trying desperately to reclaim control of the room. But the flourish lacked confidence. The rhythm was wrong, the motion too fast, too tense. The boy watched the reveal without blinking. His gaze flicked briefly to the host's fingers, tracking every tremor, every misplaced movement. He wasn't guessing. He was reading, decoding, mapping the host's unraveling in real time. The host made another large bet, not to advance the game, but to intimidate, to regain the upper hand through sheer force. But when he pushed the chips forward, his hands weren't steady. One stack wobbled. A chip fell out of place. A small gasp escaped from one of the guests. Because that slip meant something. It meant fear. It meant loss of control. It meant the host believed, even if he couldn't say it aloud, that the boy might win. The boy, in contrast, responded with a slow, deliberate motion. He matched the bet again, his hand steady, his expression unwavering. Not a challenge, not a rebellion, just truth. He wasn't acting bold. He simply wasn't afraid anymore. His mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her heart raced. Her knees felt weak. But underneath the fear, something else began to grow, a fragile, trembling hope she didn't dare name. The host scanned the room, searching for support. But the faces staring back at him were no longer entertained. They were analyzing, judging, waiting for him to explain how he had lost control of a game against a child. His confidence didn't just waver this time. It cracked wide open. And the boy sat poised in the center of the storm, unshaken. And as the host prepared to reveal the next card, one terrifying realization struck him. He wasn't just losing the game, he was losing the room. The host's hand hovered above the deck longer than it should have. A hesitation so slight most of the room wouldn't normally notice it. But tonight, every eye was locked on him. His confidence, once effortless, now strained beneath the weight of visibility. He was no longer a man hosting a game. He was a man trying not to unravel in front of people whose approval he relied on more than he cared to admit. He finally turned the next card, but the reveal lacked the smooth grace he had shown earlier. His wrist stiffened. His fingers slipped slightly. The card hit the felt with a soft, uneven thud that made several guests inhale sharply. The boy didn't move. He didn't blink. He simply traced the card with a quiet, measured gaze, reading not just the numbers, but the man who had placed them there. What the room didn't understand, but the boy did, was that tells weren't just twitches or flinches. They were patterns in behavior, changes in rhythm, variations in confidence. And the host was now broadcasting those tells so loudly that the boy didn't need strategy, he only needed awareness. Across the table, the host tried to laugh. The sound came out tight, strained, more like a cough than amusement. His shoulders lifted too high. His smile pulled too wide. His body fought to project ease while his eyes betrayed rising panic. The guests sensed the shift fully now. A woman who had once been amused now clasped her necklace anxiously, her face pale. A man shifted forward in his chair, elbows on his knees, no longer watching the boy, watching the host. Others exchanged looks that carried the same silent question. How did he lose control of a game he created? Behind the boy, his mother stood rigid, fear still gripping her, but layered now with disbelief at the unfolding change. She watched her son with eyes wide, unsure if she should be terrified or proud. She had seen him solve impossible puzzles before, but she had never seen him unseat a room full of people without saying a single word. The host pushed forward a final, desperate bet. It landed harder on the felt this time, not deliberately, but because his hands could no longer hide the tremor. He needed to crush the moment. He needed to reclaim authority. He needed the room to believe he was still in control. But the boy didn't shrink. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even look intimidated. He matched the bet again, his movements smooth and precise, as if responding to an equation rather than a threat. A jolt rippled through the spectators. The shift was complete now. Their confidence in the host had drained entirely, replaced by a quiet, dawning awe for the child who somehow refused to fold. The host swallowed hard, Adam's apple rising sharply. He could feel the judgment in the air. He could feel his image slipping. He could feel the whispers forming before they even left anyone's lips. And for the first time, a single devastating thought pressed into him. What if he loses? Because losing to a boy wasn't just losing a game, it was losing the persona he built. Losing credibility, losing status. Losing the illusion of superiority he had spent years sculpting. The boy sat perfectly still, breathing evenly. He didn't need to speak. His composure said everything the room needed to hear. And as the host reached for the final card, dread tightened in his chest. Because this wasn't a game anymore, it was a reckoning. The host's fingers hovered above the final card, suspended in a trembling pause that exposed everything he was trying to hide. His breath caught in his throat, chest rising too sharply for someone supposedly in control. The silence in the room thickened, heavy, charged, waiting. Every guest leaned forward, no longer entertained, no longer amused. They weren't watching a child anymore. They were watching a powerful man unravel. The host felt their eyes, all of them, judging, measuring, waiting for confirmation that the confidence he wore like armor had finally cracked open. He flipped the final card, a clean motion but not a confident one. The card landed on the felt with a hushed sound, sliding into place like the last piece of a truth the host never wanted revealed. And the boy didn't flinch. Not even a flicker. His expression remained calm, steady, almost serene, as if the entire game had been unfolding exactly the way he expected. The host's eyes darted between the card, the boy, and the growing tension in the room. He couldn't read the child. He couldn't predict him. And for the first time, he couldn't rely on the spectators to back his performance, because the room had shifted. They weren't on his side anymore. They were on the side of truth, and the truth was beginning to look like a child who refused to break. A woman at the far end of the table pressed her fingertips to her lips. A man straightened in his chair, sensing a collapse. Someone whispered under their breath, too softly to understand, but the tone carried fear instead of mockery. The boy looked at the cards on the table, then at his own hand. No panic, no hesitation, just understanding. He saw the probabilities. He saw the sequence. He saw the host's mistakes exposed by every twitch, tap, and tremor. Behind him, his mother's knees weakened. Her hand braced against the back of a chair. She had never seen her son like this, not nervous, not lost, not overwhelmed. Just aware, deeply, frighteningly aware. The host forced a loud exhale, trying to reclaim his presence. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, prepared to announce his hand with the arrogance of someone who could still pretend he held the upper edge. But when he revealed his cards, the motion wasn't clean. His fingers hesitated. His throat tightened. His body betrayed him before the cards ever touched the table, and the guests saw it, every single one of them. The boy studied the host's hand only for a moment. Then his gaze drifted up, slowly, meeting the man's eyes with a calm that felt impossible for someone his age. The host's breath faltered, because in that gaze he saw something he wasn't prepared for, not innocence, not fear, but mastery, the kind of mastery that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that simply existed, the kind that revealed with disturbing silence who in the room actually understood the game. A whisper of unease rippled through the spectators, not because they knew the outcome, but because they sensed it. The host swallowed hard. He waited for the boy to reveal his hand. He waited for the humiliation he planned to turn back toward him. And as the boy prepared to lift his cards, the room braced, because everyone could feel it now. The host wasn't facing a child anymore. He was facing his consequence. The boy lifted his cards slowly, not with drama, not with flourish, but with the controlled precision of someone who already knew the truth. His fingers moved gently, almost respectfully, as though revealing something inevitable rather than something boastful. The room leaned in, every guest, every breath drawn tight, every eye fixed on the small motion that would decide the fate of the night. When the boy spread his cards on the felt, the realization hit the table like a quiet explosion. No theatrics, no need for explanation, just clarity, cold, undeniable clarity. The boy had outplayed the host, not by luck, not by accident, but by understanding, by observing, by knowing. The host's face collapsed first. His expression struggled to hold its usual confidence, but the mask slipped in one brutal second. His jaw clenched. His eyes widened with disbelief. His nostrils flared with a panic he tried desperately to hide. He leaned forward as if proximity would change what was in front of him. It didn't. The boy's hand was superior, mathematically, strategically, undeniably, and worse, the boy's stillness declared that he had known it before the reveal. A murmur rippled through the guests, soft at first, then sharper, then impossible to ignore. People exchanged stunned looks. A woman whispered something into her palm, eyes wide with shock. A man straightened his jacket, no longer amused but shaken. Faces that once held smug certainty now carried something closer to awe and discomfort, because the hierarchy they believed unshakable had just cracked in front of them. Behind the boy, his mother pressed a trembling hand to her chest. Her breath caught. Her eyes glistened. Her entire body weakened with the realization that something extraordinary had just taken place, something that defied every expectation she dared allow herself to have. The host tried to recover. He tried to laugh. He tried to shrug it off. But the laughter failed on his tongue, sticking to the roof of his mouth like something heavy and sour. His shoulders pulled tight. His throat bobbed with an unsteady swallow. His confidence, which had once filled the room, now hung in tatters around him. He attempted to speak, but the room no longer gave him permission. Their attention was on the boy. Their silence was not for him. It was for the moment, for the truth, for the undeniable evidence that the power dynamic had reversed completely. And nothing terrified the host more than that. He stared at the boy, searching for an explanation, for a trick, for a coincidence, for anything that made sense. But the boy didn't offer him one. He simply held his gaze with calm certainty, the same certainty that had been building inside him from the moment the deck first moved. The host's breath grew shallow. A cold sweat gathered at his hairline. He could feel the slip, the loss of control, the loss of authority, the loss of the identity he had built on domination. Because what he had turned into a spectacle of humiliation had turned back on him with quiet, devastating precision. And as whispers filled the room, one truth echoed louder than the rest. The host hadn't just lost the game, he had lost the room's respect forever. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. The silence itself became the verdict. The boy's winning hand sat perfectly still on the felt, its quiet certainty radiating more power than any outburst ever could. The guests stared at it as though it were a mirror revealing parts of themselves they didn't wish to see, their assumptions, their bias, their hunger for a humiliation that now landed on the wrong man. The host felt their judgment like a weight on his spine. He straightened his posture, but the movement was stiff, defensive. His chest rose in unsteady breaths. His fingers dug into the armrests of his chair as if gripping the remnants of a collapsing identity. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. The room's silence swallowed him whole. People who once looked at him with admiration now looked with unease, their eyes tracing the sweat at his temples, the twitch in his jaw, the panic he could no longer contain. A woman who had applauded his arrogance earlier now leaned away from him, disgust clouding her expression. A man coughed awkwardly, shifting in his seat as though the host's downfall contaminated the air. Someone muttered under their breath, not about the boy, but about the host's behavior. The hierarchy had inverted, and everyone felt it. The boy remained still, his breathing calm, his shoulders relaxed now that the truth had settled into place. He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he didn't revel in the victory. His expression held something deeper, relief, release, a quiet reclaiming of dignity that had been threatened from the moment he sat down. Behind him, his mother's eyes flooded with tears she struggled to hold back. Her hand trembled against her lips. She had lived her life being invisible in rooms like this, but tonight, invisibility broke. Her son had forced the room to see him, to see her, to see the humanity they had ignored beneath uniforms and assumptions. The host pushed himself to his feet abruptly, trying to stand taller than the moment. But his body betrayed him again. His knees nearly buckled. He gripped the table for balance. The guests watched with cold detachment. They weren't protecting him anymore. They weren't laughing with him. He stood alone in the very room he believed he owned. He tried to reframe the situation, a joke, a misunderstanding, a harmless test. But the words never formed. His voice cracked under the weight of his own failing image. Because the boy's victory wasn't just a win. It was exposure. Exposure of his arrogance, his cruelty, his need to control others to feel powerful. And the more he struggled to reclaim authority, the more the guests recoiled from him. He looked down at the cards he had dealt, the game he had designed, the trap he had set, and realized he had fallen into it himself. The boy's mother finally took a small step forward, her legs shaking under the weight of everything she had endured to remain composed. The room parted around her, not out of courtesy, but out of shame. Because now everyone understood what the host had risked. Not money, not pride, but a woman's livelihood, a child's dignity, and he had lost both battles, decisively. And as the host stared at the boy, one fear hollowed out his chest. The night wasn't done yet, and his downfall had only begun. The host stood there, frozen, as though the weight of the moment had locked every muscle in his body. The guests weren't simply watching him anymore. They were evaluating him, measuring him, rewriting the opinion they once held. He knew it. He felt it. It pressed against his skin like heat. He attempted to smooth his jacket, but the gesture betrayed him. His hand trembled openly now. His eyes darted around the room, searching for even one sympathetic face. There wasn't one. People who had once admired him now saw someone smaller, someone petty, someone who used a child's dignity as entertainment and lost. A ripple of whispers spread from the left side of the table. Muted words, sharp glances. Eyebrows raised in judgment rather than amusement. A man in an expensive suit leaned toward his companion, whispering something that made the other's mouth tighten in disgust. A woman, previously charmed by the host's charisma, now lifted her chin in quiet disapproval. Someone near the back shook their head slowly, as though realizing they had been applauding the wrong person for far too long. The host's chest rose sharply. He reached for the chips on the table, perhaps intending to regain some control, perhaps pretending the loss meant nothing. But his fingers slipped. The chips scattered across the felt, rolling into the silence like a confession of defeat. Gasps broke through the room. The host closed his eyes for half a second, not to think but to hide. Behind the boy, his mother watched the collapse with a mixture of disbelief and quiet justice. Not triumph, not revenge, but the slow healing that comes when the world finally acknowledges a truth it ignored. Her son, the boy they underestimated, dismissed, and humiliated, had forced them to see what she always knew, that he was extraordinary, that he was capable, that he never deserved the treatment they assumed he did. She held her breath as the room shifted its posture toward her, not with pity but with respect. A foreign feeling in this place, a long overdue one. The host saw it too, and the realization hollowed him. His authority, once effortless, began to crumble right in front of him. He stepped toward the boy in a final attempt to salvage control, straightening his shoulders, lifting his chin, forcing an expression of condescending calm. But the moment he stood too close, the guest stiffened. His presence wasn't commanding, it was threatening. It was wrong. Someone cleared their throat sharply, a warning. Another spoke in a low voice to a nearby staff member, the kind of whisper that carried consequences. The host stepped back instantly, as though burned. His illusion of power evaporated. And then came the final blow, not from the boy, not from his mother, but from the guests he had spent years performing for. A man from the far end rose slowly, his expression carved with disapproval. He didn't speak. He didn't point. He simply walked away from the table. Then another followed, and another, until half the guests were standing, leaving, turning their backs on the host without a single word. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Silence was enough to condemn him. Silence was enough to strip away the authority he tried so desperately to cling to. Silence was enough to end him socially, here and everywhere else that mattered to him. The boy sat quietly, watching not with triumph, but with a strange, heavy understanding. He had not only won the game, he had revealed something deeper, the fragility of a man who believed domination equaled strength. The host swallowed the humiliation like a stone he couldn't dislodge. His world had shifted under his feet. His name, once spoken with admiration, now tasted bitter in the room. He had lost the hand, But more importantly, he had lost the narrative. And as the host's world crumbled around him, one final question hung in the air. What would happen when the truth about the boy finally came to light? The room felt emptied of air, not silent, hushed, held, suspended in the fragile aftermath of a moment no one expected to witness. The host remained standing, his body rigid, his breath shallow, as though the walls themselves pressed inward. His face carried the unmistakable expression of a man who realized too late that the story he intended to write had turned back on him. The boy, however, did not move. He sat in the same chair where he had first been humiliated, but now his posture told a different truth. A quiet authority radiated from him, not loud, not boastful, just undeniable. The guests watched him with a mixture of awe and discomfort, finally recognizing the depth of what they had witnessed. This was not luck. This was not coincidence. This was brilliance, raw, unpolished, extraordinary brilliance hidden beneath society's assumptions. And then the manager of the establishment entered the room, summoned by the whispers, alerted by the shift in energy, drawn by the undeniable tension. His eyes scanned the scene, the scattered chips, the overturned hierarchy, the host trembling with shame, and the boy sitting with impossible calm. The manager's face darkened. He had dealt with the host before, had seen his arrogance, had heard complaints from staff too afraid to speak loudly. But seeing a child pulled into his cruelty, that broke whatever tolerance remained. He walked to the boy and knelt beside him, not in submission but in respect. He spoke quietly to the boy's mother, acknowledging her strength, her professionalism, and everything she had endured silently. The host sputtered, trying to reclaim control, trying to twist the narrative. He insisted it was just a game, a misunderstanding, a harmless test, but his voice cracked, his words rang hollow, and the room rejected his excuses with a chorus of cold, unforgiving stares. The manager straightened, turning his gaze toward the host with an authority the host could no longer challenge. He informed him in a steady, controlled voice that his privileges at the establishment were revoked, effective immediately. Gasps filled the room, but no one objected. No one defended the host. He had crossed a line, and the consequences had arrived. The host's face drained of color. He tried to protest, but the guests were already stepping back, distancing themselves from the man who just moments ago had commanded their attention. He wasn't feared anymore. He wasn't admired. He wasn't respected. He was alone. Security moved in quietly, not aggressive, just firm. They escorted him toward the door as whispers followed like shadows. His downfall wasn't explosive. It was quiet, final, humiliating in the way that matters most to men who rely on performance. He lost his audience. When the doors closed behind him, the air shifted again, lighter, softer, as though the room itself exhaled. The manager turned back to the mother and her son. He apologized earnestly, acknowledging the wrong done to them. Then he said something that made several guests inhale sharply. He offered her a promotion. A stable role, better pay, better hours earned, not granted out of pity. Her eyes filled instantly. Her knees wavered. She covered her mouth to keep from sobbing openly. And then the manager turned to the boy. He had heard whispers, seen reports, noticed things others ignored. The boy wasn't just sharp. He was rare. A mind shaped by observation, patterns, and quiet brilliance. He promised to connect the boy with a youth mentorship program, one designed for gifted thinkers, strategic minds, future leaders. The boy blinked, unsure how to process the shift. But when he glanced at his mother, tears streaming, hands shaking, smile trembling, he understood one thing clearly. He had protected her. He had defended her dignity. He had rewritten a night meant to break him. And now their lives were changing. Not because he won a game, not because he embarrassed a powerful man, but because he refused to accept the version of himself others tried to impose. The guests who remained approached cautiously, offering apologies, admiration, and quiet words of respect. None were enough to erase what happened, but they acknowledged what the boy deserved: to be seen, to be valued, to be recognized. As the boy and his mother walked toward the exit, the room parted for them, not out of fear, out of honor. The same path that once felt like a walk toward humiliation became a path toward something new, something they had never been allowed to imagine. And the boy, gripping his mother's hand, stepped forward with a calm certainty he had earned one painful moment at a time. Because sometimes the smallest voice in the room isn't there to be silenced. It's there to reveal the truth everyone else was too afraid to see.